Hello, everyone. I'm Robert Rodriguez, and this is my friend Jerry Hammack. I'm gonna put Jerry away now. It's all right. Together this year, we produced a book called Ribbons of Rust: The Beatles Recording History in Context, Volume 1 of a projected series. Now, the first thing you might be wondering is, what is a ribbon of rust? I would say that any music, any sound that you enjoyed produced from the 1940s through, say, the early 80s when things started to go digital, was captured on a ribbon of rust. Plastic ribbon infused with iron oxide, hence ribbons of rust. So sometimes when you're creating a project, you're way too close to it to really sort of get a sense of what it is if it's any good, if you hit all your goals, what is it exactly? So to that end, we convened a panel of esteemed folks that we know. 2 academics, 2 Brits, 2 first-gen fans, a successful music producer, record producer in England, a female, somebody who saw the Beatles on the Ed Sullivan Show in the room. All these people we thought came into the Beatles at different points and got to know them through different points. A couple Beatle authors. So that makes for a big sounding panel, right? Actually, it's 3 people combined. Sibbie O'Sullivan, author of My Private Lenin, memoir of a fan who never screamed, written extensively about the Beatles. Richard Mills, a Irishman living in England who's produced now a couple of volumes and many writings on the Beatles, including The Beatles and Fandom and the newly published The Beatles and Black Music. And there's our friend John Leckie, a producer whose career started at EMI as the Beatles were winding down. He was a tape operator on the first 4 Beatles solo albums: Sentimental Journey from Ringo, McCartney from Paul, All Things Must Pass from George, and Plastic Ono Band from John. He also went on to work with Wings before going on to work with Radiohead and Dukes of Stratosphear, XTC, Simple Minds, any number of great acts. So we decided to have a conversation with these people. We gave them the book to read and got their take on it, as well as a few lay fans, intelligent Beatle people that we knew that had read everything. Dan Eilenberg and Doug Thompson, man of few words, and Troy Hubbard of the Garage Door Radio Show, and Mike Sekulich. And we sat them all down after I had a chance to digest the book to get their takes on what it is we did. And here's what they had to say, starting with Richard Mills.
I just want to congratulate you both on the book. It's absolutely fantastic. The minutiae, the detail is unbelievable, and a picture paints 1,000 words. And the pictures that you've got in that from the old NMEs, the record covers of the vinyl are absolutely gorgeous, completely evocative of the period. Also very sort of elegiac in a way as well. You feel really a bit nostalgic looking at all of this, all this beautiful material. And also, it's really good that you've got the QR codes that you can listen to the book. So I I can be incredibly nerdy, and I read through the whole book yesterday, and then I listened to all the music, and it's very, very subtly you get drawn in, and it's a really, really deep dive into the period. And I fancy myself as a bit of an expert on the Beatles, and there was things in that book I found out about Lord Woodbine that I didn't know. There's lots of really funny bits in it as well. Like Bernard Purdy thinks that he did 21 Beatles songs as drummer. I love the description of the famous picture of the Beatles standing in Hamburg in their caps. That you and Jerry said, "Oh, these were their pink caps." And if this ever goes in YouTube, I don't want to use the words that the Beatles had to describe those hats because it's a little bit rude. But these pink caps, the level of detail is unbelievable, and also it'll be fascinating to hear what everybody else in this panel says, because I suppose everything in this book is predicated on one word, which is electricity. We've got references to all the Grundig recorders. We've got unbelievably tape of John Lennon singing with the Quarrymen on the 6th of July, 1957. We've got, I mean, how fortuitous was it that King Size Taylor got the Beatles' last gig in the Star Club in Hamburg on his 4-track? I love the way you describe the instruments. Ringo's premier drum kit to his Ludwig drum kit, John's Rickenbacker, George's George, just that guitar that he bought, the black Gretsch that he has in 1962. It turns up on the cover of Cloud 9 in 1987. All the myriad of connections and strands in the book is absolutely wonderful.
Oh, thank you so much for that, Richard. Really appreciate that. Yeah, the idea that we had going in, first of all, we didn't want to tell stories that had already been told before about the Beatles. There's so many stories that are told over and over and over again. So we wanted to try to look at the whole story in a different way, and centered around, as the title refers to, Ribbons of Rust, centered around the recordings that they made, because that's what the Beatles were always after. That was the most important thing to them, was to make recordings. So the idea fundamentally within the project was to expose this through line of influence to influence, or the influences that they have or had. So how they were influenced, to the influence that the Beatles come to have. So we try to track that through the book. Starting this early period, there's a lot more of the way the Beatles were influenced. All of the early artists that really lit them up and got them excited about making music. But as you get to the end of this particular part of the story, we also follow out how the Beatles' influence of even these early recordings, Love Me Do and whatnot, were picked up by modern artists and continue to this day to influence people.
Yeah, the Smithereens, isn't it? Did Love Me Do with Andy White on drums. Is that correct? Yeah, absolutely crazy. And I love the Percy Phillips sessions, the detail of that as well.
Yeah, we got Go ahead, Robert.
Oh, I was just going to say that we've all through anthology heard the recordings that were released, the first two sides that we go into detail discussing in the book. But that one after 909 recording from 1960 is very intriguing, that nobody has heard. But it's just funny how that particular song bookends their career. And it was only at the very end that they finally nailed
it.
Yeah. Took a few more passes than most of their tracks took, although
number 9.
I can only second what you just said about the detail that you've gone into, and all the little photographs and the little asides, even the adverts for Grundig tape recorders and those kind of things. And I mean, one of the things is people, probably the general public, don't understand how difficult it was to record something in those days, to make a recording. Now it's really easy, but back in those days, you'd have to know someone that had a tape recorder, and it would be going at 3 3/4, so it wouldn't be mono, for instance, and it would, although everyone had mono at that time, of course, that was the way it was heard. But no, I was just fascinated, and also the way that you went back to the other records that were around at the time, the early Tamla stuff, and I can't remember the names, Mr. Postman, and the songs that the Beatles covered,
and yeah,
what was happening at the time, and also what was happening in England. You mentioned Larry Parnes earlier, and the whole Billy Fury and all those people, in Liverpool, there was, I think, Tommy Quickly, and I was looking at the charts where you had When Please Please Me came up, and you listed all the other records that were in the charts. And of course, I know every one. I could sing you all those songs, those 20 songs. I couldn't now. I wouldn't know one record in the charts. But back in 1964, I could sing you every song on that chart. And all sorts of, you know, crazy thing and American stuff, you know, Four Seasons and Johnny Tilson just died this week, didn't he? Johnny Tilson, Poetry in Motion. There was a big record, and then it sounds mad, but it was a big record at that time for me, you know.
The variety of the music that the Beatles were exposed to and influenced by in the late 50s and early 60s by today's kind of standard of I think of music as it's absorbed today in all these little micro verticals of genre or style or artists. Like everyone can find their own one little thing, and to a extreme degree. Like you can like rockabilly, or you can not like rockabilly in general, but you love psychobilly. Right? You
Yeah,
know,
the detail of it.
yeah, the level of detail, the granularity that is in contemporary consumption of music that was just not there. There was a broader experience, fewer options to get access to it, and so a more communal experience. But it was a wide ranging musical experience in comparison to what we have in a contemporary way. Maybe Robert, you can share about just access to the music that the Beatles had. What challenge that was?
Yeah, so it wasn't as though rock and roll was something coming out of the BBC at that time, as we know. It was something you had to be an aficionado to track down, either by going to listening booths at record stores, which we talk about, or else Radio Luxembourg, which we write about a bit in the book, coming from the continent, that they had a particular advantage being in the north of England for that bandwidth to reach them at night. And it was not super solid, but it was something that if you were motivated enough to hear the stuff coming out of America more or less in real time, it was something you made the effort. And all four Beatles have spoken to that. I was lucky enough to track down some air checks of period broadcasts from Radio Luxembourg, 56 or so. And it was astonishing to me to hear that it wasn't what you would expect to be like the cream of the crop of artists operating at the time. It was everything. If it was rock and roll, if it was coming out of New York, being broadcast on American airwaves, Alan Freed would be putting this stuff out there, so it would be made available to Americans. So a lot of what gets talked about in Beatle history about the Cunard Yanks and these sailors in the port city of Liverpool bringing back the latest American records and how they had this advantage, that's been a bit overstated based on the research I've done and other people have done. That first of all, the sailors tend to be older than the kids that were eating up rock and roll, and tend to be more jazz fans than rock and roll fans. But a lot of this rock and roll stuff that the Beatles became such connoisseurs of, you know, B-sides and obscure R&B acts and stuff like that, there were outlets, in fact, in Britain for this, licensing deals to where these records were getting issued. And if you were somebody that spent a lot of time hanging out at record stores, you know, you could request it, you would find it, and you'd sit there in that booth, and if you didn't buy it outright, you would play it over and over again and study it and pick it up and add it to your set. So there's records we talk about, like James Ray, If You Got to Make a Fool of Somebody, a song that's not even known in the States, really, but became a hot thing in Liverpool. And then years later, of course, George does Got My Mind Set on You, which was like this happy fluke that gives him the last ex-Beatle #1 hit in the States. So it's just kind of astonishing how this below-the-radar stuff was like their bread and butter. And you see plenty of evidence of that on display in the Get Back film, where they can't remember words to the songs that they wrote, but they can whip out songs they haven't heard in 10 years and just play the stuff verbatim. It's just amazing. But that's part of their DNA.
Well, it's interesting. Your book was so good and so thorough and surprisingly diverse and very modern. And, I had to ask you, well, how do I get these, QR codes? Because I'm a dinosaur. But
Did you work it out?
um, that's a private conversation, Robert.
Okay.
I grew up in Washington, D.C., that, we're midway between New York in the South and AM radio, the variety of TV, and I think also because the interplay of black and white was a real gift to kids my age at that time because the radios did play such a wide variety. You could have Little Richard on at 1 o'clock, and you could have Perry Como on at 1:20, and then you could have Conway Twitty coming in, and eventually somebody else would sing, and my mother would tell me to turn it off. She wants to listen to opera. It was a wonderful thing. And the way you described it with the thoroughness and the titles of the record, it was just, I know those songs. I haven't forgotten those songs. And I think that variety is exactly, I think what Jerry said is that the vertical selection now that people have. And so if you're educating, especially younger readers or younger listeners, because of this book, I think that the sort of mystification of how the Beatles became so good and how their songs could be so different becomes clearer because it's in their own audio DNA. It's in their body. And because they listened to so many, and that's not even the English folk songs, that the pub songs, there's things that I didn't experience myself, but the harmonies of Irish singing and stuff, all of that comes together, and it just makes their story so fantastic, but also so legible. And that was one of the gifts, I think, of your book, that it could appeal to fans my age who know the Beatles stories, but certainly not the way that any of you know it, because I just want to personalize it. This was my group. I grew up with them. I saw them in Ed Sullivan's studio. There was they changed my life. And when he started doing the playlists and stuff, I don't want to say it was progressive nostalgia, but it was certainly my, DNA nostalgia going back because those were the songs that I heard. And not only that, but because my father was a jazz musician, he wasn't a fan of rock and roll so much, but the intensity of the beat, the intensity of the kind of indecorousness of the blues and everything. That was again part of my DNA too. So what the Beatles were doing made absolute sense to me, and then from that they did the incredible things that they did. And so I really think that that's going to be the gift, one gift of this book. The playlists especially were very enlightening because I don't carry those playlists around in my head, but I know those songs. And what's happening with the deaths, you mentioned Johnny Tillison, we're people are dying. I mean, what can I say? I don't know. How long am I going to live? I don't know. But these names that are on not the top level of that kind of musical culture, but they're there, and it got me thinking about a lot of the other songs that maybe didn't make the list, and especially we had access to James Brown songs. We loved all James Brown. Seventh Grade, man, Night Train, Here We Go. People, threatening to sneak down and go to the Howard Theater, and some of them got in, waiting at the door and stuff. And these are white kids, and Link Ray was our guy too. He was from Maryland, and That was really outre music. There was a dance that we all did in junior high school called Jack the Ripper, which I will not demonstrate. It
Go
was
on.
it was pretty intense for kids that probably didn't know really the significance of what they were doing. And I think that probably explains a lot of the easy leap into sort of the Beatles revolution of rock and roll just isn't dumb music, the split between, oh, it's, devil's music, it's this, it's that. No, the Beatles made rock and roll what we always knew it was going to be. And that's really intense, intelligent, solid, great, various subject matter, just all the kinds of things. And they did it. And I think that the fact that they did it is because of exactly what you guys have said, is what they listened to, what they absorbed, and what they knew that they could do and experimented with and ended up doing. I think it's a fantastic story. And I know as the book progressed, I knew what was going to happen, obviously, not the technical things. But those last pages, Robert, those pages, both of you, those last pages, because that was it. John Lennon calls himself in the interviews, I'm a record man. That's what they always wanted, was a record. And Jerry, in terms of tape recorders, I loved the product placements in the book. There's all this material culture.
Could I chime in really quick? Is that okay? I'm a friend of Robert's. I was invited to this. I've been a longtime friend. It's a pleasure to listen to all of you on this. I've heard you on the cast. I've read a lot of your books as well as just some of your writings and stuff. But just an honor to have been invited to this. And I just was Richard the one that you guys, Robert, you and him were talking for 20 minutes and went, "Are we on?" Was that episode?
Yep.
Oh, okay, that's great. That was one of the most endearing conversations I've ever listened to. I just want to do a shout out for that. A little context, and I don't want to take up the time, but I've known Robert for a long time. We didn't have anything in the 70s. We had like 3 books to read, and the holy grail, so to speak, to me anyway, was the Beatles Illustrated record, because it was about the records. It was about the music. And the fact that it went chronological is like, and again, think about my life in the mid 70s. I'm on headphones, like the big honking, realistic cost headphones, listening to this stuff. And, there you go. Like, and there's times when my head was like leaning to one side because of the bad mixes. But just trying to understand like how they created this. And Rob and I would always talk about like, that's a great record. Like Instant Karma is a great record. You hear the track, and then you hear what made it a great record. And I guess what I'm kind of leaning to is that this book basically tells the story of what were the great records the Beatles liked, what inspired them, and things that they probably picked up intuitively. They're like, no, we're not. I mean, mixing was part of the, there was challenges there electronically and just technology, but why they did the arrangements they did and why they approached them the way they did. And I just take a look at, what I learned and received from a lot of the books I've read. And this is just taking it deeper and deeper. And you always say, how much deeper can you go? It's like, you do it right, you can go deeper and you can make it engaging and interesting and you can learn things you never heard. And the way you blended the stories with, the diagrams of the mixing. I mean, I'm like in a candy store with this book. So thanks for inviting me to this.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mike.
Jerry, I have a question, and maybe to Robert too, is, both of you obviously have like a passion and a strength for coming at this from like sort of a different angle, or not a different angle, but, Robert, I know, is growing up, his dad was, a very strong writer, right? And just understood history, right? And then Jerry, I just think of some of the, how you made what may be perceived as a technical thing just very digestible. Like I get it, but even I'm interested in like when I see the diagrams here of like the panning and all that stuff. How did you guys weave that together? to make it sort of like, as you're kind of almost telling these concurrent stories, right? You're telling what's influencing them, and then you're saying it's good, and this is the output that came out of it. Like, how did you kind of balance that out or collaborate to make that work so well?
With a sledgehammer.
Yeah, I mean, in terms of the writing process, I mean, we both have our areas of strength, and so we were developing the narratives fairly independently. Narratives around in my case, around the recording activity. Robert around the more generalized history influences, that kind of thing that he's just for whatever reason, there's always at the tip of his tongue. And then just as part of the editing and book building process, we weaved the language of it together to make it all work consistently. So in the case when you get to the recording information, I asked Robert to help me understand where influences, and this will be more important as the series goes forward, of where these influences of the Beatles are showing up, that they were showing up in the recording work. I'm glad that the way that it turned out, that it reads as an integrated piece, and not as distinctly two voices. We wanted to, and the challenge of this is anything you find on tape of the Beatles, we want to look at, we want to evaluate, we want to explore, we want to bring to the reader's attention. And in some cases, we don't have a whole lot of information. There's a lot of new digging that has to happen to find out what's going on with that. And with my previous series, it was 11 years of researching and writing to get that together. We're maybe figuring we've got 7 or 8 years in this, probably coming up, something like that.
Mm-hmm.
And
the astonishing thing is, as we've saw in the last week or so, recordings continue to surface. Last year, there was the Stowe School and the EMI live thing they did, a promotional thing, back to back, April 4th and April 5th in 1963.
This is our latest record. Yeah, we got C then. 1, 2, 3. If there's anything that you want, if there's anything I can do.
Now we've got 2 new live gigs that surfaced. One was when they were supporting Roy Orbison, and it's an audience tape, I think, of their 7 songs they did, and a couple of Orbison's set. And then August 21st, I think, in Bournemouth later that year when they're headlining, and it's the day before they shoot the cover of With the Beatles, and they're just working nonstop, as they pretty much had been for years going into that. It's funny that all the stuff that we are going to be teeing up for 1963 Volume 2, it's all surfacing. So I hope it continues to. But in Volume 1, the stuff that we've talked about that, maybe hasn't gotten a lot of attention, maybe has, just because I don't know how many fans really know that the day John and Paul were formally introduced, some guy recorded the Quarrymen set that day. the first time John, Paul, George, and Ringo recorded in Hamburg when they were still in separate groups. Can't hear it, but it happened. We know about the Sheridan stuff with Bert Kaempfert, but an overlooked thing, the day after they recorded the Ringo take of Love Me Do in London at Parlophone at EMI Studio, they schlepped back to Liverpool to record at the Cavern Some Other Guy in Kansas City for Granada TV. That was formally recorded. Acetates were made. Brian shared them, trying to, draw interest and get them more on TV. So that's cool stuff. We mentioned somebody hot wiring their TV at great peril of electrocution to themselves to record this broadcast of the Beatles on TV in October of '62. And therein we get a live performance of Love Me Do when the record is new. And lo and behold, Ringo is doing that rhythm shift in the instrumental break of Love Me Do that Pete Best got crucified for when Anthology 1 came out. Like, what is he doing? Guess what, folks? That was their live arrangement. So Ringo's just following orders. It adds little insights into their story, stuff we didn't know before, but going to the best evidence, which is the tape. Wow, that's something we didn't know about the Beatles. So we're just trying to track that stuff as best we can and just fill in all these little gaps of knowledge at this distance. That's what history is made up of these little things that fall between the cracks that, Jerry and I worked as diligently as we could to dig up as much stuff that we didn't necessarily know in advance existed. But sometimes things fall your way, like when Jerry had the exchange with the grandson of Percy Phillips in Liverpool. And we were able to find out, that rumored second visit where they tracked One After 909, it in fact did happen. The record apparently doesn't exist. Maybe it'll surface one day. But our logbook for 1960 is no longer in our possession. But we can document that it is, to our knowledge, that yes, they did come back. They did have a second session here. Unfortunately, the supporting evidence doesn't exist, but trust us, we know it's something that's part of family history. So anytime you can get people that were there, witness something, and bring their story, however small, to the table, it always seems to add a little bit more knowledge that we didn't have before. And that's a good thing. And that's what, we're trying to collate the stuff that we're in that sweet spot, the Goldilocks point that Aaron Weber has talked about, where we're far away from the history happening to be able to view it with a bit of critical distance, but not so far that there are no longer any living witnesses around. And that's the kind of stuff that we, to the best of our abilities, are trying to track down and get their stories before they fade away. So it's a good place to be in Beatles scholarship right now.
I was struck by the opening or close to opening photograph of the Bommy, that's playing in the Bommy. I'd never seen that photograph before. I'd seen some others of post-war Liverpool. I think it's a really good place to begin that visual sense of this is the environment that the Beatles came out of, a fundamentally different environment if you compare United States after the war. We didn't get bombed and nothing, we were just moving along,
Right. It's something you might read about in Beatle biographies, but until you get the visual, picture tells 1,000 words.
Exactly.
And that's why we started the book in 1954, was because that's where these cross currents all come together. You've got the end of rationing in Britain, which is a huge thing. Just as these kids born in wartime are turning 15, 14 years old, coming of age as adolescents, and wanting to start establishing their own identity and pick their own films, their own music, and all this apart from what has been handed down to them from their parents' culture to that point. And then within a fortnight, you've got Lonnie Donegan recording Rock Island Line from Elvis recording That's All Right Mama in Sun Studios. So it's like all these currents are going on at the same time. So in looking in photos of Liverpool 1954, I find this picture of kids playing in what's left of the damage inflicted on the port city of Liverpool during the war. And yes, as you point out, you can contrast that with people playing with hula hoops in America and stuff. It's just amazing thing to see that sort of contrast of what was going on in different parts of the world. But there was this cultural revolution, if you will, brewing beneath the surface that as rock and roll explodes, Blackboard Jungle and Rock Around the Clock, and then Elvis, and then Bill Haley, all these things going on all at once, hitting the youth of England and youth of America just at the point where they're ripe for it. It's like it had to explode the way it did, as much as the older generation is trying to tamp it down.
Well, I can tell you, I don't know how old I was when I realized that Liverpool had been bombed, but I know it wasn't in my teenage years, and it was even later that I learned. I think it was when I some connection with Joe Orton had written a play much longer after the beginning of the fascination with the Beatles. Did I learn that rationing had ended in the 50s, And so I'm thinking just this sort of ignorance that American teenagers had, through no fault of their own necessarily. But when you then find out about it and put it together with the phenomenon of these four guys getting together, living the way that they did, listening to the same music that American teenagers of a certain age listened to, but under very different circumstances. It just adds to the story so much. And I think that by beginning the book with such a photograph, it should stun people, I think, that don't know about how devastating the war was.
Things like the bomb site picture.
Yeah.
Well, I was born 1949, so I was 10 in 1959, but somehow I knew all these, Elvis. I had an older sister who wasn't really into rock and roll, but I still had Little Richard 78s and Heartbreak Hotel on 78 and stuff. But those bomb sites, that picture could have been in London, could have been around West London where I was. I never went to East London because it was bombed. It always smelled. You could always still smell the smoke and everything. It was devastating. In the 60s, I go out on my bike and you'd say, "Hey, let's go to Shoreditch," and it was still burning to some extent. So the bomb site thing was very much, and there'd be bombed houses. It was great because when I was a kid at school, you'd take over a bombed house. It would be your little den. You'd light a fire.
Clubhouse.
You'd protect it. Yeah, it was a bombed house. It was probably falling down and really dangerous, but it was open. There was no security around it. You just walked in, lit your fire, and claimed that house as yours on the streets of London when I was 10, 11 or something.
And thinking also as we point out, rationing's going on a decade, for a decade after the close of the war. There's still rationing going on. There's still there's still this deprivation that people are living under and operating under. That when you're an ocean away and haven't been impacted in that way, doesn't you don't personally connect with that. But and another thing, the experience in North America of the Beatles compared to the experience in the UK and in Europe of the Beatles is a wholly different thing for a very long time. And Capitol Records, Beatles releases are not the albums that the Beatles put out in the UK. I remember for myself, personally, when I first heard the UK version of Rubber Soul,
I know.
I thought Rubber Soul was a country album from the US version of it that I heard, and I hear the UK version of it, and it's a whole different thing. It's a whole different vibe when you put that collection together in the way that they intended to release it. So what we in America knew about the Beatles and the experience of the Beatles was very North American centric compared to what was going on in the UK.
How do you reckon? Oh, there I go. How do you think you'll tell that story on these upcoming books? Because that's going to be an interesting way to go about it.
We plan on raking Dave Dexter over the coals, but mercilessly. No, I don't know.
Who is this intended for?
Yeah, the audience.
I think that, like so many things, the further you get from the history, it gets decontextualized. Beatles we know from the latest CD compilations, or a TV special like Beatles '64 or Get Back, things like that. It's all sort of fragmented and within its own little universe, and not the universe that it was created in. So when Jerry had first come up with the idea, and I was a great admirer of his work in the recording reference manual series, of like, geez, this is documenting and laying out the story of them in the studio better than anybody before, more up to date, so much data and all that stuff. And the idea of building a history outside the studio, what was going on in their heads when they walked into the studio, and what world did they walk into when they stepped out of the studio. I jumped at it because it's like, that's the kind of book I want to read for sure. So, I'm walking around with a lot of stuff kind of in my head anyway, but now it's down the rabbit hole to start doing the real research. And Richard, I'm sure that this may be part of your world. In fact, I know it is just from your writings, The Beatles and Fandom, is that nothing captures it more than the period ephemera. When you start going through Melody Makers, the New Musical Express, and Disc and Mirror Echo, all that stuff. And that's why we put some of that stuff in the book, like the front covers and the pop charts and all that stuff. It's harder, especially if you're a younger fan, to put it all together. It's like, oh, this was in the charts when Love Me Do came out, or this was the world as rock and roll is starting to become a thing, and skiffle. People are still into pop and jazz, and Billy Eckstine is the cover boy this issue, things like that. Or when Elvis starts to become a thing, and it's like he represents a threat because he's immediately associated with, in America, with fights and gangs and Teds in England and all this stuff. You add that layer of culture to it, you get a deeper understanding of the headwind the Beatles were pushing against as they're making these records that we revere as great stuff today. You don't, when you hear a Beatles tune on Sirius XM, understand that world that was going around when this stuff was being created.
Robert, I think, just to jump in real fast, I think that it's you put it in context, and it wasn't, these records weren't created in a vacuum. Just to jump in there, and I think the book does a great job in that. Sorry, just to jump in.
Yeah. Thank you. Yeah, that was a big part of the point.
Yeah, it's fascinating because to me it seems like the book 60 to 63 is almost like the long 1950s, because when you look at the pictures and the charts and the bomb sites, it's a very, very different world. If you put into sharp relief psychedelic Beatles in 66 and 67, the way they look, their attitudes, how they've changed, and you compare that to the Beatles that we get, knowing their backgrounds, their music, what Liverpool was like, what they were listening to, all of that, they seemed very, very different people pre-fame as well. I mean, I remember Robert and Jerry, the bit in the book when you have a picture of Studio 2, and you say how imposing it must have been for those sort of four slightly bohemian lost kids from Liverpool wandering into this studio, and the adults are living upstairs, and there's the orchestra in the next studio. They're coming from the British provinces to London. You capture almost what it must have felt like psychologically for them. And I think it wasn't 7 hours in a car. The trip from Liverpool to London was so much longer. It was long in terms of miles, and it was long culturally as well. I mean, that all comes out really explicitly in the book. I mean, I think it was Dominic Sandbrook that said that there was the long 1960s, that 1972 is a bit more like the 60s, as we associate all those cliches with it, soft drugs, cannabis, long hair. We really get a sense of the context of the 50s colliding into the early 60s when we look at the pictures, we look at the technology, we look at the tape recorders, we look at the posters, we look at the clothes, we listen to the music. I mean, Slim Whitman, Lonnie Donegan, who was it, Cherry Pink and Apple Blossom White?
Yeah.
The whole tradition that they come up. Yes, Eddie Calvert, the whole tradition that they come out with, you get this, you really get this kaleidoscopic history of what produced the Beatles, and it just informs. You get a real sense of their personalities and who they were because of all that ephemera that you talk about. Just very little, very little things. I remember reading that the British Prime Minister, Harold Wilson, in the 1960s, Labour Prime Minister, a Labour Prime Minister, he always would say in the press that he loved eating steak and kidney pie, and he really loved the northern working class soap opera called Coronation Street, set in Manchester, because he was trying to really get working class credentials. The same with the Beatles. You look at the instruments they bought from Hesse's, you look at what they're eating, what they're singing, what they're listening to. And honestly, Robert, I just think that the context is incredible. The way that Robert and Jerry, the way that they're just plugged into something bigger than themselves. That's exactly what it is. They're plugged into something bigger.
Well, they carry it with
It
them
really kind of
too.
speaks. God, I'm sorry. Go ahead.
I'll get right back to you. They carry it with them too. I use the term in the fullness of time. We have a different understanding of the Beatles in the fullness of time than the contemporary Beatles, than what they were going through, and we think about this we tend to think about this creative era that they inhabit, the 7 years kind of in public that they inhabit, as being a period way more extended than it was. So all of these early influences, as with everybody, are carried with them through their career, and they tap into it in different ways at different points within their career. You've got very early on, they're doing the Till There Was You. They're doing show tunes and things.
September in the Rain.
September, yeah, because this was part of their it was part of their vocabulary, and they carried all of those influences forward. That broad range of music that they were hearing early on, and as all of us, there are formative years musically for everybody, and you just can't help it. It's so deeply ingrained to you that that needle always falls back into that groove. And the Beatles used those influences throughout their entire recording career. It never really was that far from them.
You make me think of Traveling Wilburys and Roy Orbison, Del Shannon, and the way George in the Wilburys got Roy Orbison. They never gave up on Roy Orbison.
When you look at the history as of the Beatles coming to the States, doing the Sullivan Show in '64, before that year is over, I think one of the first one out of the box from that genre was Ella Fitzgerald doing Can't Buy Me Love.
Yeah.
And within a year of that, you had Duke Ellington doing I Want to Hold Your Hand. And, he was doing the soundtrack to Mary Poppins. So definitely some people of seemingly a different world were not so snobby enough to not recognize a good song when they heard it and what they could do with it. So it speaks well to them. It's a cross current. It's a synergy between the two of them. The Beatles weren't going to be, we're just going to play rock and roll, man. No, if there's a good tune that they could listen to and think, well, we could do something with this. Jerry had brought up Till There Was You. That was from The Music Man, a song seemingly outside their boundaries, and make it a winning part of their set. It's the second song they do before they're playing on American TV, winning over those non-rock and rollers in the office. It's a very canny move, but I think it was also genuine and not calculated.
Do you think
They just
Brian
happened to love
Epstein
it.
had anything to do? Do you think Brian had anything to do with that? Do you think Brian said, "Hey, play that tune"? You know?
I wonder about that because often when you talk about the Decca audition and the songs they did that we would consider novelty tunes now, that he had sort of dictated, well, you're going to do this because we need to showcase your versatility for this record label. And people were like, oh, that's why they lost, because they're doing Sheik of Araby and these terrible novelty tunes.
Yeah.
But in fact, those were a big part of their live appeal. And I think I have the quote in the book from somebody who was a Cavern attendee that she looked at the Beatles as a musical comedy act. It's not something you think about, but that was very much part of their live presentation. So if that's wowing them in the clubs and
the name as well. Remember,
right. The name itself is a joke.
Yeah.
So it's all part of the package. So it kind of made sense at the time.
Something else I think that's lost probably in modern times is this idea of artists as entertainers, as more broadly based entertainers. And the Beatles were definitely a part of that tradition, where the trajectory included all kinds of entertainment. It might start with music, but you end up, Elvis ends up on film. Beatles end up making movies, right? You're on variety shows. The variety show trend continued into the 70s. I don't know if people younger people wouldn't recall this, but if you had a hit record like in the US, you might get a TV show out of it. There was the Captain Tennille had a TV show. Tony Orlando and Don had a TV show.
Sonny and Cher.
Local band.
Cher had a TV show. It was just the trajectory of and the idea that you weren't just a musical artist, you were an entertainer. And so the Beatles were witness to that tradition and part of that entertainment tradition. They in their career they did the early on they did like the pantomime stuff for British TV. Just silly stuff, had nothing to do with their music, but had everything to do with them as personalities and entertainment personalities. So the broader range of the broader musical vocabulary played right into that.
And out of necessity in Hamburg, you got their command to mock Schau. We've got that great picture in the book from the Top 10 Club where it looks like something riotous is going on. You have to hand it to them. They adapted to situations. And if this is what we need to do to survive here, this is what we're going to do. And it didn't apparently take much persuasion to John and Paul to start putting on an act, putting on some kind of show.
Well, clearly Paul likes to be on stage.
I've heard that.
To this day.
That showbiz context comes across so strongly, and it's a massive strength about the Beatles, so that they're not just categorized as a rock band. They were really pop kids, and they really came from that showbiz tradition. I mean, something that sticks in my mind is that in 1963 they appeared in so many light entertainment shows like Mike and Bernie Winters and Blackpool Night Out and the Morecambe and Wise Show. The Morecambe and Wise Show, they actually come on at the end, and they're wearing stripy boating blazers, boater hats, and they sing Moonlight Bay with Eric and Ernie, with Eric Morecambe and Ernie Wise, and that clip of them singing with Morecambe and Wise really encapsulates the fact that they've come out of this pre-rock and roll tradition, and also the playlist in your book brings that out, across so strongly as well. Just really how open-minded they were, which the only closed-minded bit that I can see in the Beatles is that John Lennon is always saying that he hates jazz, but I don't know how much that was just for effect or how dogmatic that was, or if it was because the Cavern, had jazz bands and blocked rock and roll. But honestly, John Lennon is wide. They've all got very, very Catholic musical tastes.
Yeah, exactly right. Which is, again, it's sort of stating the obvious that it's a huge part of their sustainability. We talk about the sets they had to play in Hamburg, 6 to 7 hours, whatever it was on given nights. And rock and roll songs are 2 minutes at best, and they're on amphetamines. So you got to stretch that stuff out.
90
So
seconds.
it's like every ounce of creativity they could muster.
They probably thought they were playing at tempo.
So it makes sense that they're going to draw upon absolutely everything they've got in them, and it so happens to our benefit that they are great lovers of every kind of music. And like you say, John said he hated jazz. There's a great quote from him in the Hunter Davies book. I think some people have clarified it to mean he hated jazz fans, but in any event, musically, isn't "Ask Me Why" kind of a jazz song in terms of
yeah, and of course you bring out in the book that his Rickenbacker guitars he spotted with a jazz guy playing that, and he absolutely just couldn't wait till he got his hands on this jazz guitar. Yeah.
I want to give full credit to you as being a key contributor to this book. If you like this book, a big part of that is because of Dan, who was our soundboard and helped enormously in the production of this book. So thank you so much, Dan.
That's so kind of you. Really kind and totally unnecessary. It's a pleasure. And I just read the book. That's all I did. And a couple times. I enjoyed it. I just read the book. That's all I did. And a couple times. I enjoyed it. John Leckie, especially, it's so great and an honor to see you on my laptop screen here.
Hey, Robert, I do have one quick question. This is for John. I think the conscription real fast that they did away with in the UK. I don't know how old you were, John, but would you have been eligible? I think that's a big factor in the ban, the conscription not being there.
This is very true. Yeah.
Threat.
Yeah. Yeah. Were you old enough to have to sign up?
No.
Okay. I didn't know there, but
I wasn't old enough.
What are you taking for, Troy?
But that was a big thing. The other thing I did, this is a crazy one. The talent spot. It was great the talent spot, which was the BBC thing, and in the diary there, I noticed that the Beatles played it twice. I had tickets for that, and my mate Bob went. And it was really foggy because it was one of the worst winters in London at the time. It was like dense fog. And my mum said, "You're not going out tonight, John. You're not going to go down there." So I never went. And then my mate had tickets. Hey, the Beatles are playing again. And I still never went. So I never saw the Beatles, but I did have tickets to the talent spot. And I wish I'd kept that ticket because it was a ticket there. And other little things I really liked was little thing about Ringo saw Sister Rosetta Tharpe at the Cavern. That's amazing to have that little bit in 1958 or something. How did you get that information?
Apparently it's out there.
Because Sister Rosetta Tharpe is Chuck Berry, everything she plays is Chuck Berry.
Mm-hmm.
What was the other thing? Ken Dodd. You mentioned Ken Dodd, and of course the Beatles were on the Ken Dodd show. He came from Knotty Ash, Liverpool, close by to where they lived. And he also recorded at that studio, Philips, where they did recording. I noticed that you put a little thing about the guy. The guy really liked Ken Dodd's voice, which was special voice, and he wasn't a comedian when he was singing. I used to tape op on Ken Dodd sessions at Abbey Road, and they were usually 10 to 1 in the morning. You'd do the orchestra and everything. In the afternoon, Ken would sing. 4 songs, and in the evening they'd go out to dinner, and in the evening they'd mix it, and Ken would always come around with a £5 note. He'd tip everyone. Ken Dodd always give you a £5. I was only getting like £12 a week at Abbey Road. He was giving me half my week's wages as a tip, which was a big thing. Ken Dodd, and he was great. Thank you, Lucky Stars. Yeah, I had a Grundig tape recorder, TK19, what's in the picture.
Okay.
because I never had a record player, and I bought a deck which I wired up to the tape recorder because I couldn't afford these things. But my big thing was recording "Thank You Lucky Stars," "Ready Steady Go" with the mic against the speaker on the TV set.
Yeah.
Don't speak because I'm recording. And again, I wish, because that Beatles "Thank You Lucky Stars," I don't know if it was a mime or if it was live, but that's not available, is it? That's lost.
Oh, it depends on which one it is. Yeah.
I see. The very first one, which would have been
probably not. No,
the
unless there's other people
that
that did what you did, and those tapes have surfaced.
Yeah.
I'll look for it. Had you heard the Unbury Speeded "It's Johnny's Birthday" before?
Oh yeah, you sent me that. No, how'd you get that? Where did that come from?
Somebody took the time and trouble, and I thought, because you said you're on it.
Yeah, I'm on it. I'm singing there. That's
nice.
Me and Eddie Klein singing on Johnny's birthday. Yeah.
That's great.
Oh, cool. John, are you going to write a story? Are you going to write your book?
I need to. Yeah.
Yes, please.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yes,
please.
We're here for you, brother.
Okay, great. I'll send it to you. You can read it, approve it for me. Get a fact check.
Absolutely.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Just take another right away. Can we go right now? Okay.
Keep that one. Mark it fab.